Hey everybody, Vladimir Duthiers here with CBS This Morning. So glad you could join us today for what I know will be a really fascinating discussion. And I'm really looking forward to it because ever since I became acquainted with this gentleman's work, his poetry, his writing, I've been fascinated by him. He's got something that's really interesting that he's going to be talking about today. So we're hoping that he's going to join us in just a few minutes. And once he does, we'll get him on. Hey, what's going on? A lot of people are saying hi. So we're waiting for Jason Reynolds to join us, and when he does, we'll be able to get started with this Instagram Live. It's going to be a fascinating discussion that he's going to share with you. So we're just waiting for Jason to join us up. And when we do, yeah, I changed my shirt. Everybody's asking. I changed my shirt. I started at 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's almost 12:30 here. Jumped into the shower and was able to change my shirt. Back to the basic black. Everybody's always asking me why I wear black shirts because it's a lot easier to look in one sort of standard look and rather than switching it up with different looks every single day. And I just see Jason Reynolds has just joined. So Jason, you know how to ask to be part of this Instagram Live. Go ahead and do that. And let me see. Hang on one second. Maybe I don't know how to do it. Stand by. There you are.
Hey,
My man.
Vlad, what's happening, brother?
What's going on?
In the house.
I feel it. I'm so happy you are in the house. Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you, man. Good to see you. You're safe? Everybody's safe?
Everybody's safe. Everybody's doing well here. How about on your end?
Everybody, we're maintaining, man. We're all right.
Nice. All right, so let me do this little intro, Jason, just to set up what we're going to be talking about today. Of course, my name is Vladimir Duthiers. I'm a CBS This Morning, CBS News correspondent. And of course, I'm talking to author, poet, Renaissance man, Jason Reynolds. He's the national ambassador for young people's literature. And he's launching, this is very cool, y'all. He's launching a new video project and newsletter with the Library of Congress during the coronavirus pandemic. And the goal of this is to engage young readers. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this because, you know, we've talked about this, but I was a nerd growing up. I love to read. You know, there's that old Hemingway quote, which I'm paraphrasing, but if you have a book, you're never without a friend. And that was me. I moved around a lot, single mom, moved from school to school between 3rd grade and 10th grade. I was in a different school in a different neighborhood, and books became my only friend. And I love the fact that you are so passionate about getting young people to read. So why did you decide to partner with the Library of Congress?
I mean, you know, honestly, so my position as the national ambassador is run through the Library of Congress and Every Child a Reader and the CBC, right? So it's basically like I'm basically the laureate for young people's literature. So we know that the poet laureate, we all know the poet laureate and what the poet laureate's job is and their term and so forth and so on. It's the same thing for me, except I represent young people's literature. And the reason that I took it on is because I think it is important that we make sure that we figure out ways to let young people know, first and foremost, that they are seen, that they're valuable, that their lives matter, right? Before we start to sort of try to shove literature down their throats, right? Now, I know that we have an educational system, we have school, we have all these things, and so we fight this good fight about trying to figure out how do we engage young people with reading. My whole platform is that we engage young people with reading by first engaging them as human. And once we figure out how to convince them that their internal stories are just as valuable as all the external stories, then it's easier for them to connect one with the other, right? And that's sort of my premise and my platform and my goals. It's always been my goal. It'll always be my goal.
So it's called Write campaign, and Write spelled W-R-I-T-E, Write R-I-G-H-T, and Write R-I-T-E. Why the different spellings, and why did you choose to go that route? Because you've talked about campaign names for different spellings and different meanings of the same word.
Yeah, so right. So WRITE, we all know it, you know, write means to write, to put language on paper usually, or to put language nowadays on screen, right? But that's not the way that I'm actually talking about it, right? So write does mean that as definitively, but what I'm saying more so is express oneself, right? And then there's write, R-I-G-H-T, and R-I-G-H-T is typically what, in this context, would be what we think of as correct, right? What it means to be correct. I don't really believe in correct as sort of an ethos, right? I don't believe that there is a such thing as correct. I think it's a little more blurry than that. And so what I mean in this context is however you see fit, however you choose, right? So express yourself however you choose. And then R-I-T-E definitively means sort of tradition, ritual, right? Like a rites of passage, right? A ritual. And so this is the express yourself however you choose ritual. And I just serve as the conductor of said ritual, the facilitator of said ritual, the coach, one might say, who puts the ball on the floor and then allows you to pick the ball up and do whatever you want to do. If you want to shoot the ball through the hoop, cool. If you want to kick the ball through a goalpost, cool. If you want, right, whatever you sort of imagine that ball to be is on you. My job is just to create the ball and set the ball down. That's it.
Love it. One of the things that you've also talked about as far as a writing prompt, and I think it's important because when I was a kid, as much as I loved books, I always found it hard to talk to, especially adults, when they would say to me, if you were to write something, if you were going to write an essay, if you were going to write a piece of poetry, what would you be inspired to write about? And like all kids, I'd look at my toes and I'd say, you know, I don't know what I want to write about, you know?
Right.
And so you often ask people to think of an imaginary tattoo, but you want them to specifically think of a backstory for that tattoo. Explain that process and why you choose to engage that way with young people.
Yeah, so you know, I have a theory, Vlad. Like my theory is, if you tell young people to read and write, they won't do it because young people don't do anything they're told to do. Like, well, I wouldn't, right? If you say, hey, reading and writing is good, so read and write, it's like, who are you, right? And so instead, and the other thing that we do sometimes as adults is we fight against the stimuli they already have. So we say, you know, don't worry about tattoos till you're older, or we say, put your video games down, or we say whatever it is but that's a futile fight. We're going to lose that fight every single time. So what I think about is, well, what do they love? How can I tap into what they're already interested in? What seems a little irreverent, and then come through the back door? So let's pick tattoos. I'm a kid who's covered in tattoos, been covered in tattoos for a very long time. My father was covered in tattoos growing up. I grew up with an irreverent man, right? And so I figured, well, kids are always interested in tattoos. Even if their mother says don't do it, makes them even more interested. So let's say if you could imagine yourself with a tattoo, and you could get any tattoo you wanted, what would you get? But it's got to mean something to you. What would you get? And then give me the backstory. Or another one is, I show the kids my, this will come out a little further down the line, but I have one where I show the kids my Nintendo Switch. Because everyone thinks that because I write for a living, I don't play video games. And it's like, no, you know, here's my Nintendo Switch.
I mean, hold on, Jason. Hold on one second. Let me just show you. Not only do I still play video games, this thing is never far from where I am.
Exactly.
It's like right here on the coffee table.
Exactly. And you're like a brilliant man who's accomplished, yeah, right. and you still, it's like, it's still a thing that we are allowed to do. We don't have to shame a thing in order to encourage another. So I say, here's my Nintendo Switch. And what I want you all to think of is the storyline for a new video game. That way, it's like, okay, I like video games. This is interesting. Let me get into this. Another one that I have that I love, I show the kids I have a letter from Langston Hughes, like an actual letter that Langston Hughes wrote. Not to me, but he wrote it to a fan years ago. And I own the letter. And I show it to the kids and I say, imagine writing a letter to your hero, right? Now, that's a prompt that everybody does. So instead, what I say is, imagine writing a letter to your hero, and then imagine your hero writing a letter back to you. What does your hero say to you in response? So it's not about writing the letter to the hero. It's about what does the hero in return say to you. So then you got kids saying like, yo, I wrote to Michael Jordan, or I wrote to LeBron James, and LeBron James responded, you know, dear Jonathan, you're absolutely right. You are the best ball player I've ever heard of. I think that, right? And so what it does is it gives young people an opportunity to to let it be known what's happening on the inside of them without actually having to say it or to shame to make themselves feel small or embarrass themselves. It's all wrapped around the context and the framework of a writing prompt.
That is, you know, Jason, I've never thought of that. And I think that might even be a good exercise for adults, because oftentimes anybody, you know, human beings, sometimes we're unable to see ourselves in the same light that others see us in, or we're unable to see the potential in ourselves that others see. And that's specifically geared towards young people. When young people say, you know, I'm not anybody special, but there are people around them who say, yes, you are somebody, you deserve to be seen, you deserve to be heard. So doing something like that, an exercise like that, is a way that, you know, would allow people to put on into paper what they know deep down inside of them is who they are.
Is who they are. It's an amazing. I mean, look, I showed on the very first prompt. I showed the young people my medal. Right. This is, you know, this fancy thing that I might should have it on today. I don't know, but I never wear it. But it's something that it comes with this position, and it's a lovely sort of you know. It's a lovely reminder of what it is that I'm doing. But I told the young people, this is sort of an honor given to me for loving young people and loving literature. What's an honor, what's an award that you could create for yourself that does not exist? And that way, and so you, something that you believe, right? And so you see young people like, oh, I would make the best dog owner ever award. And I deserve it for these reasons. Or I'm the best, you know, couch napper. Or I'm the best fish stick maker of all time. Here's the reason why, right? And it's these, whether it's funny or whether it's sort of introspective, whatever it is, it's young people having an opportunity to tell the world what they're great at.
Man, I'm just listening to you and I'm thinking about, like I said, like I know that these are geared towards young people, but I can certainly find applications as an adult, because I keep thinking as I'm listening to you talk, man, what if somebody had said this to me when I was a kid? When, you know, I felt that I was always getting in trouble with my parents. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up because I dressed in black. People were always giving me crap because I dressed in black all the time. I did that even as a little kid. And, you know, if somebody had said to me, you know, what are you good at, and write about that, I probably would have had a different outlook as to my own existence. Right. And I know that you didn't start, what I find absolutely fascinating and why I called you a Renaissance man at the top of this discussion is because you didn't like read a whole book till you were 17 years old. And I wonder, and look at what you've accomplished since then. I wonder, what if you had been presented with a series of exercises like this, how that might have changed who you are?
Exactly. I mean, you know, I think I didn't read a book until I was 17, but I had, you know, I had rap music and I had other things to sort of show me my possibilities early, right? So even though the books weren't doing it, there were other avenues, right? I wonder who I would be if I didn't have rap music, if I didn't have people who looked like me, who were just spilling their guts, just telling their truths, because that's really all it's about, right? Like it's easier to sometimes own the world around us when we can own ourselves first. And I think once I was able to do that as a young person, whether there were books in my life or not, they came later on, but owning myself, I was able to do. And so by the time I did discover books and I found stories, they were easier for me to grab a hold of, because I knew who I was, right? I had a semblance of who I was, or at least, and even if I didn't know completely who I was, I knew nothing was wrong with me, right? I knew that I had something to offer. Because I had these other examples in my life beforehand. I'm just trying to make sure that we speed that process up for these young people. I want to make sure that those of them who feel a little lost or a little alone, or like they don't have relationships with language or literature or stories, that, you know what, Vlad, you know what it's like? It's like swimming. So I love to swim, right? And the thing about swimming that's fascinating is that people who are afraid of swimming are afraid because they don't understand it. And it's not that they don't understand the water. They don't understand their bodies, right? We think it's about the water. It's not that you're afraid of the water. What it is you don't understand your body, because if you understood your body, you would know that it's literally made with built-in flotation devices, right? That we call lungs. Your body is meant to float. So if you understood your body, the water seems less scary. And so what I'm trying to do is help young people understand their bodies, themselves, their internals, and then reading and writing become a little less daunting.
Is it easy for, and I'll ask you to reflect through the prism of your own experience, is it easy for people, young people, older people, to find, as you say, the knowledge of who they are, their existence through literature, through what? And I love that you made sure to point out that it doesn't necessarily have to be a book. It can be rap music. It can
Sure.
be a film that speaks to you, that allows you to tap into something beyond sort of the surface level of what you present to the world or what people think you are presenting to them. I mean, is it fair to say that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, look, I think ultimately, as adults, I don't think we're asking the right questions, right? When it comes to our relationship with young people around us, right? So what we say is, listen, you got to get to know yourself. And they're like, well, how do I do that? Right? And I think sometimes there needs to be prompts. And as adults, what we know is there have been experiential prompts in our life that are in our lives that have introduced us to more of ourselves, right? So we've experienced a heartbreak, and then it's like, okay, I know this about me now. Or we've lost a parent. It's like, okay, now I've learned this about me. But there were other things that could have been that we could have sort of done preemptively if we were asked the right questions by the adults around us. But sometimes those questions aren't asked, and if they are asked, they're asked from a judgmental tone or a place of this weird sort of dynamic that adults tend to have when it comes to children as the authoritative figures. But imagine if we could just say, look, if you could give yourself an award, what award would it be? Or if you could give yourself a tattoo, what tattoo? Or if you could frame something on a wall, anything or anyone, what would you put in the frame to hang on your wall to look at every single day? Right? These are the questions that we should be asking. That way it feels there's a bit more of a finesse there. There's a bit more of a softer touch. We're actually asking for intimacy and not for them to give up parts of themselves in untrusting situations, right? Like that's all I'm really trying to do,
So that begs the question, why? Why do you, whenever you appear on CBS This Morning, your passion for literature and for young people shine through. What is it that drives your passion? Because it would be easy to just chill and do your thing, do your poetry and do your writing and say, there are a lot of artists, Jason, a lot of writers, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of rappers who say, my work is on the page or my work is on the record. And if you want to know me, if you want to know what I'm all about, there it is. But you go beyond that. What drives that passion?
For me, man, and look, I got a lot of partners and colleagues who are brilliant writers, but who got into the business to be a writer and then were categorized in the children's sector, but that's not what they got into the business for. And that's okay, right? If that's not what you came, if you came to just tell your stories and then they marketed you to a certain population, that's not your fault, right? I got into this thing because I love kids. Right. I happen to love storytelling, and I love telling stories and writing stories. I love language, and I love poetry, and I love prose, and I love format and structure and all that. I'm a nerd about those things, but the nerd part of that is here, right? But what's happening here is my love for the youth of America, the youth of the world. And the reason that this is moving at a certain speed and at a certain pace is because my job or my passion is about figuring out the alchemy of language and how to put certain words together to cast spell on the things I love the most, which are young people. Right? And the spell is only meant to embolden them, to give them legs, to give them backbone and fortitude, and let them know that somebody in the world loves them and sees them for who they are and not for who they are projected to be based on our own fears, insecurities, and amnesia about who we were as young people. Right? Like that's all I'm trying to do.
Yeah, but that's deep, dude. That's like, I guess also, having the ability to have discussions like this that we can share with our viewers and the people who are logging on makes it so that, 20 or 30 years ago, if you were a person who felt closed off to the world, who felt as if the world didn't understand them, who felt as if their own families didn't understand them. I'm talking about my friend, but I'm actually talking about me. There was no Instagram Live. There was no Facebook Live or way to engage with somebody like yourself to talk about these things that would provide some semblance of light and guidance. And I worry now that because of this pandemic, that a lot of the things that we're talking about become even more difficult for young people because they're so closed off to their teachers, their educators, their friends, the other stimuli that they need to channel some of those creative juices that you're talking about that are sometimes buried deep inside. So I wonder if you think about that too. It's probably affecting you too.
Of course, man. I mean, look, I'm locked in the house like everybody else. I have an active mind like everybody else. I require humanity like everybody else. But I can't allow myself. The reason I work so hard is because I have to. One, because I suffer from clinical anxiety, right, in a very real way. And so if I don't put my brain to a task or put it somewhere where it is fed or given some sort of life, then it goes down the rabbit hole, and I can't afford to go down that rabbit hole, right? So what I choose to do is believe. It was one, live in the space of young people. I try to put myself in their shoes, and in their shoes, I know there's pain and there's fear and there's frustration and uncertainty. But because young people are young people, there's also some jokes and there's funny and there's laughter, there's video games, there's all these other things that young people always seem to figure out how to tap into. So I need to basically tap into my 16-year-old self, my 15-year-old self, my 14-year-old self. I need to figure out how to dredge that up, right? And say, look, I need you now more than ever. No matter how immature or irresponsible it may seem, if tonight's going to be Cheez-Its, tonight's going to be Cheez-Its, right? Like whatever, like that's what we have to do, right? And the other thing, Vlad, is that I have to believe, man, that when this is all over, that humanity will seek out the things that it needs. And what it needs is each other, right? My greatest influence, it's interesting because people always say, like, what do you think, what are your greatest influences? Humanity's greatest influence is itself, right? Human beings influence each other more than anything else influences us. So I just can't imagine when this thing is over, all of us not sort of pouring ourselves into human interaction once we figure out if it's safe, right? Once we sort of get over the initial fear and the reticence of it all. But I think we need each other inherently as human beings in the same way that chlorophyll needs sunlight.
Love that. On the flip side, I should say, and you've probably noticed this too, which is that the social distancing measures that have been put into place across America have led to some really creative endeavors by people, whether it's coming up with new ways to tell jokes or to write music, or I've seen tons of TikTok scenes that are just mind-blowing. In fact, one of the things, Jason, that I've loved about where we are today, if there are a few bright silver linings in all of this, is you ever get that feeling sometimes when you're just going through like TikTok or Instagram or social media or anything, and you see these like genius moments, these genius pieces of art, and you say to yourself, there's a lucky few of us who have platforms because by serendipity and people looking out for us and a ladder that was dropped for us and it gave us a step up, we're able to do what we do. But there's 6 billion people on this planet who probably all at some level or another have some creative spark and creative genius that lies dormant, and it takes moments like this for that creative spark to sort of to come to light. And absolutely. I see that all the time. And I'm like, man, that person is a much better writer than I am. Or that person, is whatever it is. I'm just constantly amazed. I always say to my buddy that one of the things that I'm so annoyed about myself, and you can cultivate a lot of things, but I can't cultivate. I'm not witty. I have not a witty bone in my body. Like when people come up with something really witty to say, I'm always like, man, I would have thought of that like 2 days later. I'd have been like, hey, you want to know something funny?
Right. You're like, I got it,
Exactly. And I'm just so shocked to see how amazing humanity is in the wake of this horrific pandemic.
It's been incredible. I mean, there's a buddy of mine, Mac Barnett, he's a famous picture book writer. And he's got this thing where he does, readings and during the day, but on the weekends, he has this thing called a live cartoon where he just uses paper and drawings and all this, that. It's a whole storyline and it's brilliant. And it's called like The First Cat in Space Ate Pizza. That's the name of the show. The First Cat in Space Ate Pizza. And it's genius. And it's just moving paper around on a desk. And it's shot with his iPhone. And there's music. There's a score. It's brilliant, right? Or I've seen John Krasinski. Have you been watching John Krasinski's thing?
We just did it today on CTM. We just
it's
had
brilliant.
it at the prom. It was amazing.
It's brilliant, and it's like, of course we need good news. Of course, and shout out to John Krasinski. I think, and just doing it out of the kindness of his heart and doing it for the right reasons. But also, it's brilliant, right? Like it's one of these things where his writing, the timing of it all, his comedic timing, I mean, the curation of it all, the fact that it is so lo-fi with his daughters drawing in the background and everything, it's brilliant. And we're going to look back on this time and realize that there were strokes of genius happening all around us that have been happening, by the way, but we just haven't been able to see them. But now we're all sort of isolated and whittled into one place where we are all we have to depend on. And now some of the other brilliant minds get to rise up, which is wonderful.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love also how optimistic you are about all of this, about all of us, meaning humanity and civilization, because sometimes as reporters, as journalists who see all aspects of humanity, a lot of us tend to become cynical about the world around us and the people around us. And I try never to lose that humanity that made me interested in journalism in the first place, which was to tell stories of people who don't have a platform or who don't have a voice, and to share that with the world, whether they're good or they're bad. And, you know, Amanda Gorman, who I know you know, she's the U.S. Youth Poet Laureate. She shared these words in an original composition that she did on CBS This Morning last week. And she said this, and I'm going to read it here. While we might feel small, separate, and all alone, our people have never been more closely tethered. It sounds very similar, and I guess it's because you guys are artists, and the alchemy of language is what you use. And I love that phrase, and people are remarking about that. Will we be more closely tethered amidst this, in the wake of this?
I hope so. I hope so. I think, look, man, first of all, I have to say that it's not that the cynicism and the pessimism doesn't creep its way in, because it does. I mean, I'm human, right? Like everybody else. I've been able to sort of steep my life in the waters of children, right? And so because of that, I believe that young people are the antidote to hopelessness. And so the thing that keeps me afloat and fairly optimistic is because I truly believe in the potential of people who are younger, right? I believe that they have the possibility to grow and change the world. Prime example is the other day on Instagram Live, I'm watching a young lady who's 16 years old on her Instagram Live with 500 other teenagers have a conversation about voting. Where was the news? Where was everybody? Where were we? And it was so brilliant that I had to excuse myself from the conversation because I didn't feel like my 36-year-old self should be. This was none of my business.
Right.
With these teenagers, we're cooking up while everybody is saying that teenagers ain't doing nothing, right? And so I think that's where my optimism sort of comes from, right? Now the other thing is, do I believe that we're going to be more tethered? I'm always going to believe that. Like I always think that these sorts of things, though they do change us and they do shift us, they do not break us, right? Mm-hmm. And we need what we need. I believe, my grandfather was a farmer, Vlad, down in South Carolina, and when I was young, I would go out to the field and he'd have corn or he'd have, kale or whatever was growing in the fields, and he'd always talk about how each of these plants are growing separately, but underground everything is the same. It's all happening the same. The water is trickling and irrigating each plant the same, even though they're growing separately. There's no way that you can pull a crop without acknowledging the fact that all these crops are connected. The way the water is moving underground is all the same. Right? It's the same. They're all connected to the same hosing, the same tube, the same irrigation systems, right? Even if they're growing individually, right? So I cannot help but think that it's the same for human beings,
Yeah, no, they do not break us. You're absolutely right. And to the point that you made about, young people finding hope and inspiration in young people. A couple of weeks ago, I came across a local news story about a young girl named Madison Nevels, who's a fourth grader, 9 years old. And she took a shopping trip with her mom and noticed everybody was, buying, cleaning supplies and was very, it's interesting how children are able to, they've got like those instincts and those signals that even if they can't hear you or see the tension on your face. They can actually pick up on the vibes, and she picked up on that. And so she went back home with her mom, and she told her mom that she wanted to do something to make people feel better because of how they were feeling around this pandemic. So guess what she did, man? She started a live stream reading circle every night via Facebook Live on her public page. She has a thing called Story Time with Maddie, where she just reads her favorite books. And dude, people have been following along with her like all over the country and all over the world. And she's, you know, a fourth grader. She's 9.
That's it, right? Like, there's so much. Hey, Vlad, I tell people all the time, and as writers, this is what writers and musicians, I see all your guitars back there. Musicians, what we know is there is sophistication and simplicity, right? And so the thing that the brilliance of young people is that for them, it's all very simple. I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to be sad. I don't want you. That's all. I don't want you to be ousted. I don't want anyone to be unfair to you. This is very simple, right? And the way we say, well, there's more nuance than that. Sometimes there's not, right? Sometimes there doesn't need to be more nuance. Sometimes it's like, no, I don't want you to be sad right now. So let me try to figure out ways to help you not be sad. I don't want you to be afraid right now. So let me figure out ways to help you be less afraid. I don't want you to be bored. So let me try to figure out a way for you to break some of your bored. This is how young people operate. It's very much so like I've had kids tell me, hey, Jason, like I know there's all these, arguments up here around race, around class, around gender, and all of these things are very important, and they do sort of have a grip on our lives in very real ways. But to a young person, they're like, I can't understand why you all have been fighting about this for 500 years. When for them, it's like, my best friend's gay, my homegirl's white, my little, right? You know, it's very, and look, and I hope that life doesn't strip that from them. But while they have it, we should be tapping into it and remembering what that is and what that feels like and the truth that lies in that before it gets all muddy.
Truth that lies in that before it gets muddy. Let me just look real quick to see if there's any interesting questions. I mean, a lot of people are sharing the love, and I'm so grateful for that. And before I let you go, let's see if anybody's got it. So if anybody's got an interesting question that they want me to ask Jason, just go ahead and fire it up, and then we'll ask him before we let him go. Let's see here. Let me go to the end. Okay. Just people are just commenting that they love your wisdom, and they love the metaphors that you use to tell the story of what it is that you're trying to do. You know, if I could just ask before I let you go, if you were, this is my little writing exercise for you, right?
Okay.
So if you could look back to your 10 or 12-year-old self, knowing what you know now about who you are and what you want to do with your life and who you want to be, what would you tell your 10-year-old Jason?
Thank you.
Why?
What 10-year-old Jason understood was that he could do whatever he wanted. 10-year-old Jason was fully aware that the world was tiny, and that his ideas and his dreams were big, even if no one else thought so. Right? Like in my world, you know, it's like I think about young people all the time. They have such a there's an arrogance to them that is incredible, and we look at it like it's a bad thing, right? But the truth is, there's something about that ego, the idea that like, no, I'm gonna do it. I could do, and the irreverence that comes with that ego. I always say this: I don't want to live in a world where young people are not irreverent, right? Because the world doesn't change. Right, we need, right, if it makes adults uncomfortable, good, it should. That means that they're probably going to shift something, right? And so I think I would have said 10-year-old Jason, 12-year-old Jason, hang on to that, right? Thank you, because it's 10-year-old Jason and 12-year-old Jason that made this Jason. That's who I tap into to write these books. It's who I tap into to find empathy for these children. Like, that is what it is. It's me remembering and tapping into 10-year-old Jason, who knew, who had big ideas and big dreams, who struggled with his fears and his insecurities, who had all that happening, but knew that I could do something. Despite what anybody, I mean, I was 15 years old when I told my mother I was going to write a book. 15, right? And at 16 years old, I had a book printed up and was selling it out of the back of my mother's trunk. And at 17, I was driving up and down the East Coast selling that book out of the trunk while also being in school. And at 19, I paid $30,000 to have a book printed, maxed out my credit cards at 19 years old, had a book printed, took that book to New York, and that book is what ended up getting me into this industry. I always felt like it's always been big dreams, big goals, even as the national ambassador. Before I took the position, I said, look, if I'm going to do this, y'all got to let me stretch out. Y'all got to let me think as widely and as big as possible. But I don't get to be that person if I don't have 10-year-old Jason to tap into.
That is so beautiful and moving, man. And I got to say that it's wonderful that there are people like you in the world, that there are young people people who were like you when they were young, who are that bold and audacious, because for every one of you, there are probably 5 or 6 others who are not, and need people like you to say to them, whether it is as a child or as an adult, you know, you can be unafraid to be bold. You can be unafraid to be audacious, because I think oftentimes people probably deep down feel those very same things, but they think, you know, the way that the world treats me, the way that the world is, the way that the world has treated my family or people that I know or people that I love means that it's probably going to do me the same way.
Right.
And you need people like yourself and adults, because I got to check myself sometimes when some young person is like, you know what, that's stupid, I'm going to do it this way. And you got to be like, I don't want to smash your dreams, even though, like, who the hell are you to talk to me about it? I know that it's the same thing that I feel about music, Jason. I generally am one of those people who's like, you know, I know what I like. I'm not really listening to anything all that new these days, but I do recognize that the sound may not be that interesting to me because I'm old. And
that's it.
and they've got something to say that was just as important as like what Marvin Gaye was saying to me when I was, you know, a kid. You know, it's like, I can't diss that.
Hey, look, I tell people all the time, when I was growing up, it was Tupac all day. Tupac, Biggie, and, you know, all that stuff. My older brother, right, who was 45, he's like, hip-hop is KRS, Run DMC, Public Enemy, right? My mother, though, would be like, hey, turn that down. That's not music. Music is Marvin Gaye, right? Music. And my father would be like, Marvin Gaye's a little soft. Music is Jimi Hendrix, right? And my grandfather would say, Jimi Hendrix, that's noise. Music is Muddy Waters, right? But my grandmother would say, Muddy Waters, that's the devil's music. Music is Mahalia Jackson, right? Like it's the way it's supposed. It's the natural order of things. It's the natural order of things.
Right. But it's good to have people like you to remind us of that, to remind us of the natural order of things. Man, this has been, I'm taxing your time. We've been talking here for 38 minutes and I could go on for, you know, another 38 minutes, but it's been so wonderful to sit and chat with you to talk about this, because I think it's so important. And I think that, you know, in this period of time where people are concerned and worried, and some people have lost loved ones due to this, you know, horrific pandemic, it's good to have a little bit of heat and light to discuss the things that, you know, do soothe our souls, or have the potential to soothe our souls. So just for the people who are just joining us now, Jason Reynolds has now been named the National Ambassador. Well, he is the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, but he's got a partnership now with the Library of Congress, and he's organizing a monthly Grab the Mic newsletter. And it's an online video project for those of us, mostly kids, who are at home during the coronavirus pandemic. It's going to be a bi-weekly thing. It's called Write. And I encourage you to, you know, just check it out, because it's not just for kids. I mean, it's geared towards kids, but I think if you've been watching this conversation, many of the things that Jason has talked about that he hopes young people will be inspired by have inspired me. So sure. Thank you for that, man.
When this is all over, brother, let's hang out when I come up to New York when this is all over.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you very much, Jason.
You got it. Peace, everybody.
Peace out. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you tomorrow on CBS This Morning.